Hello, everyone, and welcome to this radcast of the Guy, Fawkes, and Jamen Show. Today, we're going to be exploring where we're coming from and what our goals are for this program, for this series. We'll begin by exploring where we're coming from individually, our individual backgrounds and whatnot, and then we'll shift more into where we're coming from collectively. And to kick us off, I'm going to pass it to Professor Guy McPherson. Welcome, Guy, and welcome, Fawkes.
Thank you, Jamen. And I've probably mentioned this a few dozen times, so people who've been following my work for a while already know my perspective on this. My personal goals are to inform. I'm a teacher. It's not what I do, it's who I am. At my core is a teacher. And we don't need to get too far into our absence of free will or any sort of neurobiology and neuroscience to recognize that when I came home a few weeks into first grade and started trying to teach my poor 4.5-year-old sister how to read and trying to get her being utterly frustrated that she could not distinguish between Spot and any old dog and between Puff and any old cat. That frustration was a manifestation of who I already was at that point. I was trying to teach. I was a teacher, and I spent my life attempting to do that. So my goal, as with essentially all of my work, is to inspire people to go down a track that allows them to learn, to be educated. If you want to go a step further down that path, maybe to become enlightened, to venture down that horrific path of enlightenment that makes one not a better person, but it instead dashes all of the quote truths they thought were evident out there and begin unlearning all the things this culture has thrown at them from birth. So I'm a teacher. It's who I am. It's not merely what I do. I'd like to turn to Fox now, the real Fox News, not the Fox News you've heard about on television, for your take. Fox?
Well, we've talked about education as a process of unlearning and learning before, and I think that's an important point to hammer home, so to speak, because so often we take education as just kind of pouring more on, so to speak. Now, it's true that being informed is an important part of being educated. But being educated, I think, is a process where we come to think and to think differently, to think in new ways, to take that information and to discern the patterns, right? To be able to make sense of it, to interpret it, to see what it might mean. And I think that's where we're coming from. We're not here necessarily presenting, new information per se. That's not the purpose of the show as I conceive of it, but rather to engage in a form of dialogue amongst ourselves and with the viewership. I know there was a wonderful conversation that took place last week that I'm sure we'll touch upon this week to make it more available to the public, and it has to do with going from, say, unicellular to multicellular, or something even more basic than that. We're not talking here about the beginning of life itself, but of that evolutionary event we call the Cambrian explosion, where essentially 1 + 1 can equal 3 or more, in the sense that if you have, say, for example, a male and a female, of course, this isn't the only way to reproduce, biologically speaking. But if we have 1 + 1, a male and a female, that's going to give us an offspring where you don't just have the two together, but then you have 3 and 4 and so on. And so there's this sort of multiplying effect that takes place. And I think what we're wanting to do here to demonstrate is that by coming together, we can actually co-create a form of intelligence that transcends, any one individual thinker. So as an educator, Guy, I'm happy that you're able to, draw upon your experience in doing precisely that, both in the classroom and in other settings like this.
Yeah, I'd like to think that my work goes beyond the classroom, although that's where I did spend an enormous amount of my time. And even when I was teaching in the classroom at the University of Arizona, Texas A&M University, at the University of California, Berkeley, at Grinnell College, and so on, I was delivering presentations for the general public in places such as libraries. I was writing for the public in the form of op-ed pieces in the local newspapers. I don't think we need to be chained to the institutions that are employing us, for example. I think that that's evident in the creation and the continuation of this show, of this series of episodes, that we are creating something beyond what we were born into and what we were hired into, and how we spent our time, for example, making money. So I think looking for those opportunities to be creative with our time, with our ideas, with the formats we use, with the avenues we wander down, I think that's an important part of this process of us learning, as well as our participants in the show and the audience learning as well. That in addition to unlearning along the way, one of the things we might want to unlearn is the conventions into which we've all played a part to this point in our lives. Jamen, do you have thoughts about that?
Absolutely, yeah. The unlearning for me has been really profound, and perhaps my greatest stint of unlearning has come ever since I saw the first video that I saw of you, Guy. And so that started my own process of unlearning and letting go and reevaluating, which I had been doing to kind of a lighter degree, shall we say, for some time. But the information that you've conveyed to us, the perspective, really, not just the information, but the perspective, has really been transformational to our lives. And and that's a good segue to, where I'm coming from as an individual. And I'm learning to come at this less and less as an individual and more as a collective. But to share a little bit about where I'm coming from is, you guys have been clear where a teacher is who you are, just fundamentally. I guess for me, who I am fundamentally, if I had to put words to it, is a leader and a transformer. So I take what I see around and I say, okay, what needs to be transformed here? So one anecdotal example, when I was 16 years old, I went off to central Mexico in the summer to do latrine construction and health education in a rural village in the state of Guanajuato with some other volunteers. And we were given materials and resources to build 15 latrines for the entire village. And there were more like 50 families in the community. And I thought, well, why don't we build a latrine for each of them? So I took the money that my parents had sent for me to basically travel and enjoy and buy stuff. And I worked with the local health agency to see what materials and whatnot they could contribute. And between the two, we cobbled together enough resources so that we could do a much bigger, more than 3 times the size project to get everyone a latrine in the entire village. And I got the whole community together, and I told them about what we were setting out to do, and that I was asking for everyone to pitch in. I started crying because I was just so passionate that we improve the health and the lives of everyone. And and I look at all the way fast forward from, that was 33 years ago, and I fast forward to today, and I'm still, in that same fundamental modality of, now in this case, the information that there is to convey and what there is to do is at a whole new scale. And so, for example, yesterday at the Seattle City Council meeting, I addressed the council, and I told them about you, Guy. And I said, Professor Guy McPherson is the world's leading voice on the topic of abrupt climate change, and I will bring him here to present to all of you, because you need to know what's going on. And so all that is, of course, with a view toward transformation. What can we do here in the city of Seattle? What can we do in the state of Washington? What can we do on planet Earth to save what can be saved of our fragile and dying world? So that's about all, as much as I want to say about me as an individual. And Fawkes, I really like where you were going with the Cambrian explosion, because one of the specific areas that we're working on is how do we, orchestrate, instigate a new form of Cambrian explosion, going from unicranial to multicranial. And of course, I can talk about that for hours. But that's, that new multicranial collective intelligence, I believe, is going to be crucial for us to accomplish anything significant in the face of the ongoing devastation that we're all experiencing of our planet. So that is what I am hot on the trail of instigating right now, and helping lead, is the co-creation of this awesome collective intelligence to help us solve our problems. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the collective. Back to you, Guy and Fawkes, and I say let's just make it that great popcorn machine that we always do.
Well, I would encourage our listeners and watchers, if you're out there, to take a minute and put Cambrian explosion into your favorite online search engine and get a 1-minute overview of the magnitude of the event that we're talking about here. And then think about that explosion of life in what occurred paleologically a very short period of time. Make the comparison between that life expanding, life exploding event in geologic time, and apply it to what we're trying to do here. And what we're trying to do here is become more than the sum of our parts, so that we're not just my thoughts and Fawkes's thoughts and Jamin's thoughts out there independently, and maybe we add them up and create some minor improvement with the collective as opposed to the individual. But instead, we're thinking about something much bigger than that. We're thinking about what some might be familiar with as exponential change in, again, a very short period of time. Fawkes, I'm sure you can comment far more intelligently than I've been doing on that point.
The exponential aspect of that, I think, is important to be aware of, to be able to visualize, because with anything that's exponential, you're going to have something that's starting so slowly in terms of the rate of growth that it can appear rather indiscernible at first. And so, one image that comes to mind hearing you talk there is a fire. You can have a very small flame, and it may look like what we're doing here is very small, and I would say that in many respects it is. But what we're trying to do is stoke the flames, so to speak, in terms of starting a conversation, starting a fire. And as you throw on a couple of twigs and then some sticks and logs, the combustion rate is going to grow rather exponentially as well. So that's, I think, one way to visualize it is we're trying to stoke the flames, not to bring society down, but rather to get enough excitement, enough minds together that there is this kind of explosion, that we're able to reach some sort of critical mass at which the exponential curve just seems to fly off the chart. That apparently is what happened with the Cambrian explosion, relative to geologic time, a form of punctuated equilibrium. I suppose one way to look at what's going on now in terms of the great imbalance is that it at least has, the potential to be a form of punctuated equilibrium. If equilibrium is a form of balance, socially speaking, where there's a relative, and we saw this also with, say, the Neolithic revolution, and other various revolutions that have happened even since then. So it's a well-known phenomenon. But now this explosion of which we're speaking is something that's happening not only on the level of individual minds coming together, but mediated by, matched with, or as Jamen sometimes says, crossed with, various forms of artificial intelligence, machine learning, right, and just the communication media at our disposal, so that taken together, we're going to be able to produce a form of intelligence defined simply as the ability to solve a problem, of which we have many, perhaps abrupt climate change first and foremost among them. But simply speaking, we need a new level of intelligence, because, as Einstein pointed out, we just can't solve the problems with the same level of thinking that created them.
Exactly. Well said. And building off of that, gentlemen, I want to point out that prior to the Cambrian explosion, there was a form of collective intelligence that existed even among the unicellular organisms out there. They would exchange information, they would exchange material, and there were degrees of symbiosis. And I would say that's analogous to what we have in the world today. There are degrees of information exchange, there are degrees of symbiosis, there's degrees of partnership, of sharing, but the fundamental divide that was bridged in the first Cambrian explosion, and I believe must be bridged in the second one that we're in the process of instigating here through this show, among other media, is where the individuals come together to form something truly new and unique. And so in the world today, what do we have? We have media, we have information sharing of all different kinds, and we have people partnering and essentially bartering. I'll trade you my time 8 hours a day in exchange for salary and benefits and blah, blah, blah. But fundamentally, we're still operating as individuals. This is Jamen's bank account. This is his brother's bank account. This is his boss's bank account. We're all separate, and we're all trying to do basically intelligent barter. But in a paradigm where the planet is our infinite resource and the planet is our infinite garbage can, and we end up destroying our own home, much as a bunch of unicelled single-cell bacteria in a petri dish that just outplay their hand, gobble up all the sugar and produce too much toxins, and then there's simply nothing else to do but die. And that's that's the situation we're fast approaching now. And so what I envision is a true coming together, just as with the Cambrian explosion. Those cells, they stopped bartering and exchanging information, and they simply merged and said, okay, what can we do together as a unified whole? That is what I believe is our great challenge and our great opportunity, is bringing humanity together as a unified whole, realizing that our spaceship is going down, and it's all of our spaceship. And either we come together and figure this out, or we continue on this death spiral, leading to our imminent extinction, along with the extinctions of most other species.
Well, I'll make a historical point along the lines of what you're talking about now, Jamen. You know, when we were living a more communal form of a life, a form of I'll just call it society, or culture. Of course, you know, of course there were individuals in the sense that we were, you know, we each had our own bodies. But I think the way we experienced them in relation to the whole was much different than today. And you know, with the Neolithic revolution, the transition that's well known into agriculture, we began to have a more stratified society, you know, with highly, well, at first not necessarily highly, but more and more specialized roles in terms of the division of labor. Right, so you had different roles, but you also had kind of different, you know, levels of power and ultimately control, and of course those were compounded throughout history, and with the what we often refer to as the Industrial Revolution, which was really a transition or transformation of the mode of production from a feudalistic, you know, to a capitalistic. Of course, I'm skipping some history here for brevity's sake. But basically there, a whole new world system began to emerge that put the individual, each and every individual as such, at the center of a new world order. That has had a lot of positive impact and negative. And so we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not as though we could somehow, you know, return back to our reptilian, you know, selves and sort of slide back into the sea, you know, from whence we sprang. Instead, it's taking that individuality that has been enshrined in laws and institutions and so on and so forth, and to reintegrate the individual into a larger collectivity, of which we experience ourselves as decentered parts, so that we're at once, you know, Guy, Fawkes, and Jamen, but then taken together, we experience ourselves in a way through sharing, overcoming, you know, as you put it, Jamen, ego, not as though it's dissolved into the, you know, mystical, you know, oneness of God or something like this, but rather that it becomes integrated into a more complex form of life, so that the various ways in which we relate to one another, which, by the way, the primary we relate to one another now, society's speaking, is arguably personal property. All right, the fact that this is mine, that's yours. You know, I own this piece of the earth, and you don't, so you pay me and I'll let you live on some of it, right? Or I own this factory, you can, you know, you can work there as long as you abide by, you know, my rules, right? And so this whole world order or mode of production, right, is what needs to be transformed. And so everything that we're talking about now has to be seen in the context of that larger, more radical transformation of the mode of production and of society itself. So that's I think where we're coming from is that if we're going to solve an ecological problem, right, or come up with an ecological solution of which the problem is the economy itself, then we're going to have to, you know, rethink those fundamental ways of, as we say, you know, doing business, and even basic conceptions of the individual in terms of property owners. You know, the whole master and slave or servant dialectic, right? There needs to be a point at which that system is no longer seen as a viable one, and especially in the face of the ecological limits of the planet. That sense of urgency should be enough, right? Enough of an argument for us to relate to one another differently as individuals in such a way where we overcome, you know, certain ways of relating and start to share instead of hoard, you know, what we have.
I think
Beautiful.
that's a beautiful wrap up. I think that's a wonderful way to wrap up, and it also gives us, at least what I see, as two potential conversations to follow. You talked about us as individuals. Well, are we really? I mean, each of us is comprised of thousands of organisms, what we recognize as species. So, and in addition, there's this very fluid boundary between what is me and what is the outside world. Yeah, we think it looks like skin. It looks like a very discrete boundary when we look at it from the perspective of our eyes to our skin. But you get a little closer and you realize that the membrane there is not that clear. There's a lot of the outside world in me and a lot of me in what I would consider the outside world. And then you brought up another key concept, which is that of ownership, and the so-called ownership society as described by the first President Bush. And the notion of ownership, contrary to the perspective of the Greek cynics, for example, is arguably one of the great missteps we took along the way that got us at this entirely self-centered, self-absorbed position where we are right now. So I think it's worth extending the conversation on at least those 2 points in episodes to follow.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I want to thank you both, Guy and Fawkes, and thank our audience, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks so much. See you soon.